Chapter 11. He says I'm pretty. Carrie stepped up beside me and stood there for a few moments without speaking. 2 turns flew by. Their cries sounded like screams to me. Maybe that was because I felt like screaming inside myself. In moments, my world had gone topsy-turvy. The blue sky now looked gray. The soft blue water had turned to ice. I'm sure my parents were unaware that you didn't know about Hallie, Melody. At least I never heard my father say anything. I'd appreciate it if you didn't let them know that I was the one who told you, Carrie said. I spun on him so sharply he winced as if he expected to be slapped. I guess I could lie and tell them that Mommy had told me all this, or I could pretend someone at school told me. Maybe I just figured it out all myself, right? I mean, everyone here grows lies as abundantly as the cranberries. I have lots to choose from, don't I? He nodded. I understand how you feel. Do you? I snapped, the skin on my face feeling hot and sunburnt. Yes, he replied firmly. His green eyes grew dark, but he held me with sincerity. I do, Melody. When I first realized you didn't know the whole truth about your parents, I was shocked. Even before today, I thought about telling you because I was tired of hearing you complain how my father treated you and your mother and your father. But what, Carrie Logan? He looked away, swallowed, and then turned back. I didn't know what happened. Just what's happening now, he blurted. And what's that? I demanded, hands on my hips. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw May watching us, confusion on her face. Well, I demanded. I didn't want you hating me, he confessed. My heart continued to thump, but the steel on my shoulders and back softened. I relaxed and looked back over at the ocean. I don't know what you mean, I muttered. I don't remember the story, but I remember the lesson a teacher taught, he continued. It was something about how we always hate the messenger who brings us bad news. That's why we hate to deliver it. I don't hate you for telling me the truth, I said, but I am angry, mostly at my mother. She should have told me everything before she brought me here and dumped me on the family that hates the sight of me. No one hates the sight of you. How could anyone blame you? But you're right, your parents should have told you, he said, nodding. They should have trusted you with the truth about their past and all that had happened. I guess my father hit the nail on the head when they were ashamed of themselves. That's why they ran from here to live in West Virginia after they got secretly married. But I just don't understand it all, I shook my head. Why did Grandpa Samuel and Grandma Olivia take my mother into their house and adopt her if they considered her inferior? And even though my parents lived like brother and sister, they weren't brother and sister. Why was it so terrible? Terrible enough to disown my father? To hate him so much that none of you even mourned his death? Look, I don't know the details. As I said, no one likes to talk about it. Maybe now your mother will tell you everything, he concluded. You can ask her. Yes, I will ask her, I moaned. And if she ever calls me or comes for me. I'm sorry, Melody, he said. It all stinks like rotten fish. I gazed into his now softened emerald eyes and saw how deeply he felt my pain. Thank you for caring, I said. His eyes brightened and a small smile formed on his lips. May stared up at me, wanting and waiting for an explanation. My outbursts and anger had frightened her. Why should someone so innocent and sweet be hurt by my miserable mood, I thought. Everything's all right, I signed and reached for her hand. She grinned from ear to ear. We better go back inside now, Carrie said. They'll be looking for us. He told May to be sure that her shoes were clean before we re-entered the house. There are the children, Aunt Sarah said as we appeared in the living room doorway. I was just gonna call you. Where did you go, Carrie? We took a walk on the beach. Find any interesting seashells, she asked me. Laura was always found the most unusual ones, didn't she, Jacob? He grunted. It was so hard to look at them all now that I knew the truth. Grandma Olivia sat in the oversized high-back chair, her arms on the chair and her back straight. She looked furious when she gazed at me. I felt her eyes burning through me. I don't care what Carrie says, I thought. She hates me. She hates the very sight of me, because she can't look at me without seeing my mother. I couldn't wait to leave. On the other hand, Grandpa Samuel's face grew softer, and a soft smile was on his lips. You take your cousin sailing yet, Carrie? He asked. No, sir. There's no hurry, Aunt Sarah said, her voice fluttering with fear. I can't think of anyone I would trust more on a sailboat than Carrie, Grandpa Samuel said, his eyes still fixed on me. Carrie blushed. He's the best sailor the family ever had, eh, Jacob? Aye, Uncle Jacob said. That he is. He slapped his hands on his knees and stood. Well, I guess we better be moving on. He glanced at Aunt Sarah and she rose quickly. Then he looked at Carrie. Thank you for the brunch, Grandma, Carrie said quickly, prodded by his father's look of expectation. Uncle Jacob's gaze moved to me. Thank you, I said, my lungs so hot I didn't think I could do anything but make sounds. I wanted to add sarcastically, thank you for keeping my mother and father's pictures buried in the carton in the basement. Thank you for hating your own son so much that you won't even mention his name, much less mourn his death. Thank you for blaming me for everything and anything that they did. But I swallowed back the thoughts and turned to May, signing her to thank you. They barely acknowledged her. Maybe that was their way of pretending she didn't have a handicap, I thought. Another lie to be added to the pile of buried in the Logan sea chest at dark closets. I'll call you during the week, Sarah, Grandma Olivia said, barely turning her head. I'll tell you when dinner will be. Fine, Olivia, thank you, Aunt Sarah said. She looked at Uncle Jacob for direction. When he started out, she followed. I noticed no one kissed each other goodbye, just as if no one kissed anyone hello. Only Grandpa Samuel followed us to the door. Have a good week, Jacob, he said. Thanks, Dad, Uncle Jacob replied. He shook his father's hand and they started for the car, all of us following. I'm looking forward to hearing you play your fiddle, Grandpa Samuel called to me. Bring it with you when you come to dinner. I gazed back at him. He was smiling warmly, his eyes twinkling. We had barely exchanged any words or spent any time in each other's presence, but I thought he seemed too nice to have disowned my father, too nice to carry anger in his heart so long and so firmly. Did you have a good time, Melody? Aunt Sarah asked me after we all gotten in the car. Carrie glanced at me nervously. Yes, Aunt Sarah, the food was wonderful, and this was a beautiful place, I recited dryly. Isn't it, though? I love coming here. Laura used to visit Grandma and Grandpa Logan often. In time, you will, too, I'm sure. I'm not so sure, I muttered under my breath. Carrie was the only one who heard me, but he didn't say anything. We've all been invited to dinner this week. Isn't that nice? Aunt Sarah said. No one, not even Uncle Jacob, replied. We drove home in silence, with May the only one comfortable in such a muted world, I thought. It was a relief to change out of our formal clothes and put on our dungarees, sneakers, and sloppy blouse. I felt so constrained in Laura's clothes. Aunt Sarah treated them like holy garments. I buttoned up my own blouse halfway down and tied the front ends at a knot in my waist, just as Mommy often tied her own. My mind still reeled from the discoveries and revelations about my parents. When did they first realize they were in love with each other? Was it like falling in love with your brother and sister? even though they weren't blood relatives. How did they tell Grandma and Grandpa Logan? There was so much I didn't know about my family. I felt like someone who had been living with strangers. Everyone else was still changing when I stepped out of my room. I knew May was looking forward to spending time with me, but I craved solitude. I hurried down the stairs and out of the house, confused, angry, and frightened. I dug my feet into the sand furiously and marched toward the ocean. The breeze whipped through my hair. Large puffy clouds blocked the sun. I felt a bit chilled and realized that I should have worn more than a cotton blouse, but I didn't want to turn back. On the hard-packed sand of the beach, the tide rushed up so fast I had to leap out of the way to the dry ground. It was as if the ocean itself were snapping at me. I took off my sneakers and socks and waded through the water, oblivious to the cold. If I came down with pneumonia, it would be Mommy's fault. No one would care anyway. I fumed so hard that I imagined smoke pouring out of my ears. How could Mommy not tell the truth? Didn't she think the day would come when she'd have to admit all the lies? Surely Daddy would have eventually told me everything. He was just waiting for me to be old enough. Daddy wouldn't have waited to see me hurt this way, but Mommy must have realized I would hear the whole story while I was here. All she worried about was getting away and doing her thing, becoming famous. It's not fair, I shouted at the ocean. My words were drowned by a roar of waves. I didn't realize how far I'd walked until I turned to look back at the house. I folded my arms across my breast and sat on the dry mold of sand, staring across at the ocean waves. There was a chestnut breeze, but the sky wasn't as cloudy as it seemed. The weather here changed so quickly, it was as if Cape Cod magician controlled it. I sensed the sun stronger down by the water, reflecting off the sand. Like a ping pong ball, I was bouncing from warm moments to cool ones. The breeze brushed the tears from my cheeks. I sighed so deeply I thought I might snap a piece like a china. I even envisioned my face shattered in pieces like some alabaster puzzle. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put poor Melody back together again. Suddenly I saw and heard a motorboat skipping over the waves, the spray flying up all around. Whoever was driving it was turning it sharply toward the shore and sped up, heading directly toward me. I watched with curiosity as it drew closer until it was near enough for me to realize who was driving. Adam Jackson waved. He shut off the motor and his boat drifted in with the tide. "Hey," he called, his hands cupping his mouth. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The boat lifted and fell until he was nearly at shore. "Just taking a walk," I shouted back. "I thought it was you. I have great eyesight, huh?" He laughed and then he held up a pair of binoculars. "Come on, I'll take you for a spin." I shook my head. "No, thank you." "Come on," he urged. "You'll have fun." "How will I get to the boat? I'll be soaked to the bone and shrink to death." He laughed and hopped out. He was wearing a tight black bathing suit and a light blue polo shirt, which was getting wet, but he didn't mind. He pulled the boat closer until the bow hit the sand. Then he took off his shirt and threw it into the boat before he beckoned. "Come on, I'll make sure that you don't get too wet." "I don't think so." "You don't look too happy," he said. "A ride in this thing will drive your gloom away." "You have the Adam Jackson 100% guarantee." I looked toward the house. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jacob would have a fit if they saw me get into the boat. But Adam's shoulders gleaming inevitably in the afternoon sunlight. I stood up, my heart thumping. Why not, I thought. I'm not a prisoner here. "Okay," I said impulsively. Good, he cried. Hurry up. The Atlantic Ocean isn't exactly a bathtub yet, he said, laughing and pretending to be shivering in the water. I rolled up my dungarees as high as I could and cradled my sneakers and socks in my arms, and then stepped into the water. The tide kept rising, however, and I screamed and retreated. He laughed and rushed forward, scooping me into his arms before I could protest. He then carried me to the boat as if I weighed nothing and gently lifted me over the edge. Once I was in, he pushed the boat out, pulled himself up, and swung over. See? Barely a drop on you. I can't believe I'm doing this. What's the big deal? He said, shrugging. Boats, water, fishing, they're all as common as breathing to Cape Codders. Now you're going to become one too. You have to get used to all of it or risk forever being known as an outsider. And you know how we treat outsiders, he said. He widened his eyes as though that would be a fate worse than death. He laughed and started the motor. The boat lifted and fell, and with the waves so sharply, I had trouble standing. It isn't too rough today. I feel as if I'm in an egg beater. Call this rough? Hardly. He started the engine, then he patted the seat beside him. Sit up here so you get a good view. I'll let you steer if you want. Really? Sure, come on, sit, he urged, and I did so. I haven't been out much myself this year, he said. I'm glad I had the desire to do so today. He turned to me with a twinkle in his soft blue eyes. It wasn't just an accident finding you on the beach, you know. Oh? It's fate. What's meant to be, he said with a wink. And then he gunned the engine so fast and hard that the front of the boat lifted and we hit the water with a hard bounce. I screamed and I had to cling to him, but he didn't seem to mind. Do you have to go so fast? I cried. The spray was hitting us, and the wind made my blouse flap up so much I thought it would tear it off. My eyes were tearing too. Of course, he said. You want to get the thrill, don't you? Going slow is not for people like us. People like us, I thought. Who did he think I was? The boat bounced so hard each time it hit the water, I was afraid it might fall apart. My heart was pounding. Finally, he slowed down and told me to try steering myself. He slid over and I took the wheel. He pulled himself around, straddling me, and reached over my shoulders with both of his arms and put his hands over mine. I'll show you how to do it first, he said, his cheek against my cheek. He was wearing some wonderful smelling aftershave lotion. The water and breeze and the scent of the ocean and his lotion made me dizzy. I felt myself spinning, but it was wonderful and exciting. For a while, anyway, I could forget the secrets and lies. He accelerated slowly, and I turned the wheel, impressed and fascinated with my power to direct the boat. I was so entranced with it, I didn't pay attention to his lips moving over to my ear and down my cheek. You're delicious, he suddenly said. What? I pulled to the side to look at him. He was staring at me, those remarkable eyes drinking me in, then swallowing me down. I quickly fastened one of the buttons on my blouse that had opened, but my garments felt flimsy and transparent under his piercing gaze. It took my breath away. Without warning, the boat bounced sharply, tossing him into my lap. We both screamed, and he recovered quickly enough to drop the speed and straighten the bow. We caught our breaths, and the boat bobbed gently. This far away from shore, the water's calmer and more inviting. You have to keep your eyes on what you're doing, he said, and you have to keep yours in your head. I have pupil prints in places I'd rather keep them unblemished. He laughed and leaned back. You sure talk funny sometimes, but it's refreshing. All the girls around here sound the same. Everything's goofy, know what I mean? I nodded. Why didn't you come to the party last night, he asked. I kept looking for you. I couldn't, I said. I wanted to, but your uncle and aunt wouldn't let you. Something like that. I figured, he shook his head. Must be hard for you. I bet you feel as if you're in some kind of prison or nunnery, huh? I didn't say anything. All the girls are jealous of you, you know. What and why? I heard them talking about you last night, saying how pretty you are. They did not. Swear, he said, raising his hand. It's true. You're about the prettiest girl I've seen and I've seen quite a few. He leaned toward me. I've even gone out with college girls, but you've got that 1 in a million look about you. The magic that makes for movie stars and models. I heard from the grapevine that your mother's a model. Now I understand. I sat there with my mouth gaping open. I never heard a boy at our school talk like this, and certainly never to me. Wait a minute, he said before I could respond. He got up and went to the cabinet and took out a camera. I'd like to get a few shots of you just the way you are. Natural. The wind in your hair. What do you want me to do? Just sit there. Steer the boat and be yourself. He aimed his camera and snapped pictures. These will be worth something someday, after you're famous. I laughed and shook my head. I'm not so pretty. I have freckles and my ears are too big. I'll never become famous. Adam Jackson knows pretty women, and I'm telling you, Melanie, you're one of them. Don't even argue with an expert. He kept looking at me with that gleeful smile in his eyes. He was making me nervous. Can I make it go faster again, I asked. I knew you'd want to. Just move the lever ahead slowly. I did so, getting better at controlling the boat. He even gave me a compliment about it. You've got your sea legs, he said, and he ran his palm down the side of my right leg. And they're really nice. He laughed and looked at my face. You better get used to compliments, Melanie. They're going to rain down on you like a hurricane as you get older and prettier. The blood rushed to my face. Was he just saying these things, or did he really mean them? He put his arm around my shoulder and helped steer with the other hand. He held me tighter, drawing me against him until I felt his breath on my cheek again and the soft touch of his lips. I think you better take me back, I told him, my voice close to cracking. My aunt will be turning over rocks looking for me. He laughed. Okay, but only if you promise to meet me tomorrow night at about 8 o'clock. Meet you where? He thought for a moment. Meet me right there where I found you sitting. Or are you afraid to walk at the beach at night? I'm not afraid, I said quickly. It's just you might not be able to get out. Don't let them treat you like a child, he said, his eyes narrowed. I don't, I protested, but in my heart I knew he was right. Then it's settled. I'll bring a radio and blanket and something to drink. Something to drink? Something to keep us warm. You've done that before, haven't you? He asked. Sure, I said, not even positive what he meant. Was he going to bring a thermos of hot chocolate, coffee, tea, or did he mean whiskey? I thought so. You have a more sophisticated look about you. I'd like to hear what it was like growing up in West Virginia. My college friend tells me that the girls from the coal mining towns know the score. The girls here like to think that they're so sophisticated. They talk a good game, but when it comes right down to playing it, they're not home. You know what I mean? No, I said. Sure you do. I'd better get back. Aye, aye, Captain, he replied, sitting up quickly and saluting. I laughed as he hurriedly took control and turned the boat around. You want me to put you back or closer to the house? Better put me back where I was, I said. My aunt would turn inside out if she saw me riding in the motorboat, and my uncle would put the ball and chain on my ankle. The Logans are strange, and not because of what happened to Laura. They were strange before that. I wanted to see just how much he knew. The people here gossiped. You mean how my mother and father? I asked. No, he shook his head. I don't know much about them except what I was told in school. I'm sorry about your father. That must have been a terrible accident, too. It was. You've got a lot of good reason to be sad, Melanie, but you're too beautiful to remain melancholy long. He brought the boat as close to the shore as he had brought it before. My heart skipped beats, and then he smiled at me again. Then he hopped out. Sit on the side, he ordered. Don't worry, I won't drop you. I clutched my sneakers and socks, as he'd said. He scooped my legs under again, and this time holding me tighter around the waist. Our faces were inches apart, and I thought I would drown in his eyes. He leaned in and kissed me softly on the lips. No fair, I said. I'm trapped like a cat up a tree. He laughed. That's right. And if you don't kiss me back, I'll drop you in the ocean. He pretended to let go, and I screamed. Well, all right, but just once, I said. This time our kiss was long, and his tongue moved between my lips, grazing mine. It sent a chill down my spine, but it wasn't unpleasant. I've got to get back, I said, practically whispering. My heart pounded so hard I thought I wouldn't be able to get the words out. No problem. He gracefully moved through the water and set me down on the dry land. Until tomorrow night, his face turned serious. I'll see you in school tomorrow, but I'd rather we kept this our little secret. If we don't, we'll have company. I know the kids here, and they can be pains in the rear end. Besides, I like secrets, don't you? No, I said quickly and firmly. He raised his eyebrows. Not even secrets of the heart? I didn't want to tell him that I had never really had any, so I just shrugged. He laughed. Bet you just got a sea chest full of love secrets, he teased. You'd lose. I started backing away. I have to go. Thanks for the ride. He stood there watching me walk quickly over the sand. Then he turned and waded through the water to his boat. I stopped to watch him accelerate and spin through the waves. I felt as if I had stepped in and out of a movie. He had been right about the boat ride. The dreariness that had washed over me had dried up my tears. I had a new bounce in my step as I hurried over the beach toward my uncle and aunt's house, wondering if I would ever have the nerve to meet Adam Jackson tomorrow night. Where were you, honey? Aunt Sarah asked as soon as I entered the house. She was at the doorway of the living room. She looked at my sneakers and socks in my hand that I had simply forgotten to put back on or roll down my dungarees. I just went for a walk on the beach, I said quickly. You shouldn't go anywhere without telling your aunt or me, I heard my Uncle Jacob cry from behind her in the living room. Your aunt shouldn't have to go looking for you here. Yes, I said, sorry. I told Aunt Sarah and ran up the stairs before she could ask anything else. Carrie heard me pound the steps and came out of his room. You all right? He asked as I turned in the hallway. Yes. His eyes grew smaller with interest and he stepped closer, a textbook in his hand. I heard you run out. By the time I put my sneakers on, you were over the hill. I figured you wanted to be alone. Maybe sort things out, he said. Sort things out? I started to laugh. It would be easier to unravel a beehive. He nodded, and then his eyes widened with interest. You look like you got some sun. I couldn't keep my eyes from shifting guiltily away. Did he notice the flush in my face and the excitement in my eyes? Daddy used to say they were like window panes, with thoughts as clear as newsprint. You were walking on the water, Carrie continued, nodding at my sneakers in my hand and my rolled up dungarees. Tiny grains of sand were between my toes. I'm tired, I said, moving to my room. I'm gonna rest before dinner. Melody? I turned. He held up the book. I was wondering if after dinner you might... That's your English textbook? Yes. We have a test tomorrow on clauses. The only clause I know is Santa Claus, he said glumly. It's not really that hard. I'll show you some tricks my teacher in West Virginia showed me. Thanks. Where's May? She's doing her homework too, he said. I nodded and went to my room, softly closing the door behind me. For a few seconds I stood there, reining in my emotions. I had gone from anger and sadness to excitement and thrills. I couldn't be more confused about this place, I thought. My family was hard and unpleasant, but May was sweet and hungry for love, and Carrie was more sensitive and caring than he let on. The ocean could be cold and gray, and no thunderstorm in West Virginia was as frightening as the storm we had the other night. The nor'easter, Carrie called it. Yet today the ocean was delightful, exciting, and the beach was warm and inviting. Didn't I hate it here? Didn't I just want to run away? And yet, Adam Jackson's handsome face lingered before my eyes, and his compliments echoed in my ears. Was I as pretty as he said I was? I gazed at myself in the mirror. Was there as much potential beauty as he claimed he saw? Was he making it up? What he had told me the other girls thought of me. I didn't want to become conceited, and yet I didn't want to be underestimated about myself and become some mousy creature with no self-confidence, terrified of life, like Aunt Sarah hovering in Uncle Jacob's dark shadow. I sat at the vanity table and thought, and then I gazed down at a pile of letters bound with a rubber band. They were Laura's letters from her boyfriend. I had no right to look at them, and yet I couldn't help wondering what sort of relationship they had before their tragic end. I took off the rubber band and opened the first envelope. The handwriting was pretty, almost an artistic script. The letter had been written on blue stationery. Dearest Laura, I had a wonderful time yesterday. I don't know how many times I've walked on that beach, but yesterday with you, it suddenly seemed more beautiful than ever. I didn't mean to take you away from your work. I know Carrie was upset at me appearing unexpectedly. When I get the chance, I'll apologize to him for stealing you away and leaving him with all the lobsters and fish. But I'll never apologize for taking you anywhere. I'm glad you feel the same way about me that I feel about you. I've felt this for a long time, but I didn't have the courage to tell you. Don't ask me why. I have it now. I think it's because of the way you smiled at me in the cafeteria that day. It gave me all the nerve I needed. I'm not used to writing letters to girls or anyone, Actually, you're the first girl I've ever written a letter to, not counting my cousin Susie. I know it's hard for you to talk long on the telephone. Besides, it's kind of exciting receiving letters from you too. I just get nervous about mailing the letters and maybe having someone else read them. You know who. He never seems to be happy when he sees me around, even when I'm taking you away from helping your father. Maybe when he feels about a girl the way I feel about you, he'll be more understanding. I know what you meant when you said that you were afraid of how you felt about me. Sometimes. It's a bit overwhelming, but I'm not ashamed of it and never will be. I hope you feel that too. I promise I'll try to control myself more, but you know what they say about promises lovers make. Just kidding. Only please don't hate me for loving you more than I should. I like writing to you, Laura. I see your face in front of me as I think of the worlds. It makes me want to write you all night until I see you and hold you in my heart. Love, Robert. Tears filled my eyes. Would I ever have anyone love me as much as Robert Royce loved Laura? If they had something so beautiful, why'd they have to die so tragically and so young? I sighed and thought about reading another letter, but there was a sharp knock on the door, and I guiltily stuffed the letter back into the envelope. Yes? Carrie entered. His gaze moved from me to the pile of letters and back to me. My mother says you have a phone call, a girlfriend from Sewell. Alice, I jumped up. Thanks. I went downstairs quickly, forgetting that I still hadn't put on my sneakers and socks. This time Uncle Jacob wasn't sitting near the phone ready to listen. Aunt Sarah held the receiver away from her as if it was a forbidden object that might contaminate her. Jacob doesn't approve of young people gossiping on the phone, she whispered. Don't be long. Thank you, I said, and took the receiver. Alice? Hi. Is it all right for me to call now? Your aunt sounded upset. It's all right. I'm happy to hear from you so soon. Aunt Sarah gave me a look of warning and stepped out gingerly. I miss you and I miss Sewell, I added as soon as she was gone, more than I ever expected. Oh, well, I don't have good news. Abba George is in the hospital, and when I asked Grandma Arlene about your mother and your things, she told me she hasn't heard a word from your mother since you all left. Mommy never called her? Not yet. I thought I'd better tell you. How is Papa George doing? He's in intensive care. He's very sick, Melody. I'm sorry. I should be there, I moaned. I don't know what to do. What can you do? Alice asked in her habitual blunt manner. Nothing until Mommy calls me. You really hate it there? There's a lot happening, Alice. Tell me, she pleaded. I can't, not over the phone. I'll write you a letter. Don't wait, write it tonight. Melody dear, not too long, I heard Aunt Sarah saying through the wall. She was probably just on the other side of the door all the while, I thought. I've got to hang up, Alice. Thank you for calling. Write me, and I'll call you the moment that I hear that your mother and Grandma Arlene. She said quickly. Thanks. Bye. I cradled the receiver just as Uncle Jacob came through the front door. He saw Sarah standing in the hallway and me by the phone. Was that your mother? He asked me. No, a friend from Sewell. He glared at Aunt Sarah. She wasn't on the phone long, Jacob. He grunted. And then he noticed my bare feet. We don't walk through the house half-dressed here, he said. For a moment I didn't understand. Your feet, he said, nodding at them. Oh, I just came down quickly. It was a long-distance phone call, and a decent girl thinks about those things first, he chastised. I am a decent girl, I followed back. We'll see, he said, undaunted, and started up the stairs. Getting dressed for dinner, he muttered towards Aunt Sarah. Okay, Jacob, We'll have a good Sunday dinner, she promised. Don't worry, she whispered to me. He'll soon see that you're as sweet as Laura was, and then everything will be wonderful again, she added. Her eyes glittered with hope. Hurry and get cleaned up and dressed so you can set the table, dear. I watched her walk away with that fragile smile on her face. Aunt Sarah had wrapped herself snugly in her illusions. But illusions, I thought, were just dressed up lies. Someday the weight of the truth would come down on her glass house, would shatter, and her dreams would be over. I didn't want to be here when that all happened. I wanted to be far away. I wanted to be in a place where people didn't have to lie to each other. Was there such a place? And even if there were such a place, could I, a daughter born of the world of deceit, ever hope to find it? With Daddy dead and gone, and Mommy off searching for her own private dreams, I felt like an orphan, a hobo begging for a handout of love. No wonder my eyes saw Adam Jackson's eyes and my ears were so receptive to his words. I'll meet him tomorrow night, I thought defiantly. Not even one of Cape Cod's treacherous nor'easters could keep me away.